The city where I learned my name. When I was 26, I received the email I had once believed belonged to a parallel universe, not to me. Congratulations, you have been admitted. The words glowed on the cracked screen of my secondhand laptop while the late shift at the motel crawled toward dawn. Outside the reception desk, trucks hissed past on the wet highway. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered over a fake marble counter, a dying fern, and a woman who had spent almost a decade being told that some people were simply not built for classrooms. I read the email once, twice, 10 times. The program was in Beijing, a real graduate program, the kind of place I had once only seen in documentaries and admissions brochures I had secretly collected and hidden under my mattress in high school as if ambition itself were contraband. My hands shook so hard I had to sit down. On the office stool, I had worked through textbooks on lunch, breaks, solved problem sets after midnight, memorized vocabulary while changing sheets in motel rooms, and rewritten my personal statement until sunrise blurred the words. For 3 years I had lived like a person, digging upward through rock with my bare hands, and somehow, impossibly, the sky had opened. I wanted to call my mother first. Then I remembered the last time I had mentioned the exam to her. Graduate school, she had scoffed over speakerphone, while my stepfather laughed in the background. At your age, stop daydreaming and save money for something useful. You already wasted enough years pretending to be special. So, instead I called no one. I simply held the phone against my chest and cried in the quiet office while the motel printer spit out receipts behind me like indifferent applause. An hour later, after the relief had turned into something tender and ferocious, I walked to the convenience store across the road and bought myself the most expensive cup noodles they had, 2 tea eggs, and a can of peach soda. It was a ridiculous celebration for a life-changing victory, but it was what I could afford, and I was proud enough to make a feast of it. I ate at the reception desk and made lists, resignation letter, housing, train, ticket, documents, scholarship paperwork, English materials, how to begin again. At 5 in the morning, when the rain stopped and the eastern sky went pale, I leaned my forehead against the glass door and whispered into the reflection, this time, I will not waste it. I do not remember falling asleep. I remember exhaustion, the printer, humming, the taste of peach soda going flat on my tongue, the admission email, still open on my screen, and my own reflection smiling back at me with red eyes and a face older than it should have been. Then darkness folded. When I opened my eyes again, there was chalk dust in the air. A classroom fan clicked overhead. Sunlight fell in long bright stripes across scratched desks. Someone was reciting a physics formula from memory in the hall. My right ear was being assaulted by a high nasal laugh. I knew before I even turned around. It belonged to He Yiming. At 18, he had been my boyfriend, my distraction, my rebellion, and eventually, one of the many people who helped convince me that I was only ever meant to be ordinary in the most disappointing way possible. He was leaning against the back door in our school uniform jacket, one hand in his pocket, the other tapping a pack of cigarettes against his thigh. Kiao Lin, he drawled. Skip evening. Study. Internet cafe. I have reserved machines. My throat closed. Not from love. Not from embarrassment. From rage so sudden it felt like stepping barefoot on live wire. The blackboard behind the teacher's podium read 116 days until the national exam. My own notebook lay open in front of me. The handwriting was mine but sloppy. Looping, impatient. On the cover someone had doodled a tiny crown and the words, Princess of Freedom. The last practice test tucked into the pages showed a total score that would not even get me into a decent provincial college. I knew this day, not exactly the date, but the season. The stage. The suffocating stale air of a classroom I had once treated like a waiting room for a life that never came. In my first life, I had gone with He Yiming that night. I had played games until midnight, laughed at stupid jokes, returned to the dorm, smelling of smoke and cheap milk tea, and slept through the next morning's math quiz. That single quiz had not ruined my life by itself. Nothing ever did. Ruin arrived through repetition. 1. Skipped test. 1. Missed class. 1. Compromise. 1. Sneer internalized. 1. Dream postponed until it hardened into shame. He Yiming tapped the door again. You deaf. A few classmates turned to look. The old me would have grinned, grabbed my bag, and strutted out just to prove I did not care. Instead, I picked up the math worksheet on my desk, turned around, and slammed it down in front of the boy who sat behind me. Explain this, I said. The entire row froze. Song Baishan slowly lifted his head. He had always been beautiful in the way. Serious things sometimes are too clean, too quiet, as if the world could not easily touch him. In high school, he had been first in our grade almost every month, a walking legend. With immaculate notes and a face girls wrote anonymous poetry about in the confession pages of local forums. In my first life, I had barely spoken to him. I had thought people like him existed in a different atmosphere, one that would suffocate girls like me the moment we stepped into it. Now, looking at his familiar calm expression, I nearly laughed at myself. Which step is wrong? I asked. The classroom went so silent that even the pages turning 3 rows away sounded loud. Song Baishan glanced at the worksheet, then at me, then at the still open back door where He Yiming was staring as if he had just watched a dog start solving calculus. Without comment, Song Baishan reached for a pen. He pointed to the condition in the first line. You ignored the domain. His voice was low and even. No mockery. No boredom. Just fact. I leaned in. He wrote 3 lines, clear and spare, each symbol balanced. He explained the trap hidden in the problem, then the substitution, then the reason the last interval could not be included. When he looked up and asked, understand? I lied automatically. Almost. He wrote 2 more steps. By the time he finished, He Yiming had left. That was how my second life began. That night at home, my stepfather was waiting in the living room. Back then, and apparently in this life, too, he liked to sit shirtless in front of the television as if the house were an empire and he its careless emperor. Beer cans lined the coffee table.
My?
Mother stood in the kitchen doorway, peeling garlic, shoulders rounded inward, face unreadable. He held up an empty wallet. Did you take money from my drawer? I remembered this too. In my first life, my mother had secretly given me 300 yuan so I could sign up for a weekend tutoring workshop. My stepfather had discovered the missing cash, and when he asked, she had lowered her eyes and let him assume I had stolen it. The old me had screamed, thrown a shoe, packed a bag, and stayed away for 9 days. No one came looking. This time I looked at my mother first. She did not meet my eyes. The old wound opened exactly where it had always been, yet somehow it hurt less than expected. Or perhaps I had grown large enough around it that it no longer took up the whole room. I took out my phone, opened my payment app, and transferred the money from the savings I knew my younger self had hidden from festival envelopes and snack budgets. Here, I said, it is paid back. My stepfather checked the amount and grunted. If there is a next time, I will break your legs. In my first life, I had spent years hating that line. In my second, I looked at him and thought, only you are temporary. I went to my room, closed the door, and stripped the walls bare. Down came the celebrity posters. Down came the fake pearl headbands, the glitter eye stickers, the chain earrings, the ridiculous handwritten quote that said, better to burn than obey. At 18, I had believed rebellion was and identity. At 26, I knew it had often just been performance, and performance was expensive. When the desk was clear, I tore a page from an exercise book and wrote 2 characters in black marker, Baida, then underneath in English because I had learned to love the visual certainty of Roman letters while studying later in life. Peking University. I taped it above the lamp. For a long time I sat there, breathing, while noises from the television rose and fell beyond the thin wall. I knew what waited between that piece of paper and the
Life I wanted.
not inspiration,
Not luck.
not a montage,
Work.
humiliation, consistency,
Doubt. The.
ache act of becoming a person no one around me had prepared to believe in.
Fine.
I opened my math book. The next morning, my deskmate Meng Shui stared at me as if I had been replaced by an alien. Why are
You wearing the full uniform I tugged at?
the collar? Because I am a student. She narrowed her eyes. You look weird. I had cut my hair shorter before school in my first life. Only once when a breakup drove me temporarily insane. This time I had borrowed the dorm scissors and taken off the dyed ends myself, leaving something plain and light enough to stop feeling like costume. Weird can still be pretty, I said. She snorted, then leaned closer.
Are you?
Still fighting with He Yiming, I'm done.
With him.
She blinked. Just like that. Just like that. It was astonishing how many disasters in my first life had survived only because I kept feeding them attention. By the second week, teachers had started noticing. I no longer skipped classes. I stopped sleeping in morning self-study. I handed in homework. I asked questions. I stayed after school to review mistakes. I borrowed Song Baishan's physics notes. Once, copied them by hand and returned them without folding a single corner. None of this made me miraculous.
My?
Knowledge was still patchy. I had forgotten plenty. My current self carried an adult's discipline and the memory of later study habits, but the body and brain of my 18-year-old self still tired, quickly, still panicked undertimed. Conditions still carried all the old gaps I had built through negligence. What I did have was perspective. In my first life, a low score had felt like identity. Now it felt like data.
Wrong.
Answers were no longer indictments.
They.
Were coordinates. I worked like someone mapping a minefield. By the end of the month, I knew precisely which parts of trigonometry could still ambush me, which reading comprehension, traps in English I fell for when tired, which physics, multi-step questions, collapsed because I rushed conditions, which Chinese composition prompts I could turn into something strong if I gave myself a usable outline in the first 5. I also knew I needed information from class if I was going to move fast enough. So when trouble came, it made me furious. Not because it hurt, but because it interrupted the schedule. Trouble came. Wearing roses, one afternoon the dean's assistant entered our classroom with a delivery bouquet so enormous it looked like a flaming red. Child. To class 12, she announced.
Dryly.
Who is Chow Lin? 30 pairs of eyes pivoted toward me. The card, of course, was from He Yiming. To the only girl worth loving. Meet me after school. Let us make everyone jealous. The room exploded. Some laughed. Some whistled. Meng Shui covered her face and made dying sounds. Even Song Baishan looked up from his book. Our homeroom teacher, Mr. Chen, had the timing of a vindictive god. He appeared in the doorway right as the bouquet was passed into my unwilling hands. The silence that followed was operatic. Mr. Chen took in the flowers, my face, the card, and the boys already choking back. Laughter. His expression turned into the kind of disappointment educators reserve for students they have not yet given up on but are beginning to enjoy threatening. Office, he said. 10 minutes later, he was standing behind his desk holding the bouquet like evidence from a crime scene.
You think this is romantic? No, sir.
You think this is appropriate? No.
Sir.
You think senior year is the time for this nonsense? Absolutely not, sir. He paused, thrown off balance by the lack of argument. In my first life, I had fought him over everything out of principle, ego, boredom, and hunger for drama.
Now I simply waited.
He tapped the roses against the desk. Call your guardian.
That part I could
Not avoid. My mother arrived with her handbag clutched so tightly the knuckles showed white. She apologized to Mr. Chen before he even spoke.
Then she
Apologized again after he spoke. Then she turned to me in the corridor, outside, and opened her mouth to scold me. But what came out instead was tired fear. Your stepfather will go mad if he hears.
This?
Then do not tell him. She stared at me as if the possibility had never occurred to her. I surprised myself by feeling more sad.
Then angry.
Back in class, I packed my bag for a 1-week suspension from evening study sessions and a 2,000-word
Reflection essay?
Mr. Chen announced my punishment in front of no one but made sure I felt the shame of it anyway. Think carefully about what matters. I almost said I know exactly what matters. Instead, I swallowed it and walked out.
At
The gate, I waited for Song Baishan.
not?
Because I wanted his company. Exactly. Because I needed class updates, homework, assignments, and whatever teachers said. That did not make it into official notices. I held out a folded square of
Paper.
my contact, I said. Please send me anything important from class. He looked at the paper, then at me.
Why me? Because if I ask Meng Shui,
She will send me gossip and half a photo of the blackboard. He almost smiled. Almost. Finally, he took the paper and slipped it into his pocket. I spent the next week studying in the municipal library. Every morning I left the house in uniform.
as if I were going to school?
I took the bus downtown, claimed the same seat by the window on the 3rd floor, and studied until my neck stiffened and the winter light faded. For 2 days, Song Baishan sent nothing. On the 3rd, I finally messaged first. Any changes in chemistry pace? No reply. Did Mr. Chen mention the mock exam date? No reply. I began to suspect he never checked his
Phone.
On the 5th day, he sent one message. Physics handout tomorrow.
New.
Derivation method. Don't miss it. Nothing.
Else.
I stared at the screen and laughed out loud in the silent reading room. He was
Impossible.
He was also the only reason I knew to review rotational motion that
Night.
when my suspension ended, I waited outside the school gate after evening study until I saw him emerge. Do you not like phones? I asked. They are useful for necessary things. Was I not necessary? He gave me one of those glances that seemed to remove all excess words from the air. You were asking about class? Exactly. He adjusted the strap of his bag. Then I answered. We ended up taking the subway in the same direction that night. It was crowded, winter damp, full of office workers and students, and the tired smell of wool coats. We got pushed into the same corner near the doors. I asked where he planned to apply. Tsinghua. Why not Beta? He looked at me as if the answer should be obvious. Because engineering. I nodded. Fair. Then because the carriage lurched, I stumbled into him and blurted out before thinking, you smell like peppermint. His entire body went rigid. He put a careful hand on my shoulder and straightened me at arm's length. You have a boyfriend, he said, each word crisp as
Ice.
be more careful with what you say. I stared at him for 1 beat, then burst out laughing. He yimming.
We are over.
Even so,
You are.
very principled. The train doors opened.
At his stop.
He stepped out without another word. From the platform, he glanced back once as if wanting to say something, but the doors closed between us. At home that night, my stepfather said grace over dinner as if he had invented family, then announced my mother was
Pregnant.
in my first life. That had happened after I left for university. This time it had arrived early. The news sat in the room like weather. He was smug about it. My mother was soft with astonished hope. I felt a strange cold clarity. Later, when he said I should move into the school dormitory because my coming and going might disturb my mother's pregnancy, I almost laughed. For years I had begged for space. Now they were offering exile as punishment and expecting gratitude. Fine, I said. Moving into the dormitory changed everything. It cut out commute time. It removed domestic surveillance. It put me closer to teachers, notes, practice, papers, and the rhythm of serious
Students.
It also put me in accidental proximity to Song Baihan, which turned out to be more useful than I had anticipated and more dangerous than I had intended. Dangerous not because anything happened, because small things began to matter.
The
Way he always arrived 3 minutes before the first bell, the way he underlined key phrases in history textbooks with a ruler, the way he never wasted time pretending not to care, the way he frowned at my wrong steps in math as if my avoidable mistakes personally offended his sense of order. During a cold snap in January, he handed me a white scarf at the classroom door.
for the exam, he said.
Snow was falling. Outside, fine and relentless. His ears were red from the wind. I touched the scarf.
Why? He looked away first.
You were coughing. That was all. I wore it through final exam week. The winter mock results were announced. After the holiday, I made top 10 in the grade. When my name was read at the assembly, the students near me all turned at once, some out of surprise, some out of curiosity, 1 or 2 out of naked suspicion. I walked to the stage under a washed winter sky and took my certificate from the vice principal with both hands. On the way down, I fell into step beside Song Baishan. Are you surprised? I asked. He looked at the certificate, then at me.
No. That.
One word nearly made my chest hurt. After the ceremony, Meng Shu grabbed my arm and shrieked into my ear until it
Rang.
You are 7th. 7th, do you? understand. Last semester you were practically
Decorative. Thank you, I said dryly.
Mr. Chen, who had once kept my reflection essay in his drawer like a warning label, now called me to his office for a different reason. Do not get overconfident, he said, though his face betrayed the effort not to. Look pleased. Students who rise suddenly also fall. Suddenly, I know, you and Song Baishan are the two people in this class I am watching most closely now. My heartbeat stuttered. He probably meant academically. Probably. Still, I walked out feeling absurdly, irresponsibly brighter. Then spring term began, and with it came the return of the past in a new uniform. Tao Shui became a transfer student in our class. In my first life, she had been a girl from the technical school crowd who hovered on the edges of He Yiming's world pretty in an aggressive way, too old for our games, too proud to admit she was bored. She had once led a group that cornered me outside school after a rumor about He Yiming choosing me over one of her
friends.
in that other life, they had slapped me, kicked my bag into a drainage ditch, and laughed when I cried from equal parts pain and humiliation. This time when she entered the classroom with the head teacher, she did not so much as look at me. I knew better than to trust that by then there were fewer than 100 days until the exam. No one had time for melodrama, which of course was exactly why melodrama became dangerous. The attack happened on the morning of a district-level mock exam. I was hurrying towards school with my admissions card in one hand and a steamed bun in the other when three girls stepped out from the alley behind the stationery shop. Tao Shui stood in the middle. We need to talk, she said.
No.
I tried to walk around them. She blocked me. It will take a minute. I have an exam, she smiled. So do we. The first slap came from the left. I tasted blood before I understood I had been hit. Then somebody shoved me. Somebody grabbed my sleeve. Somebody hissed in my ear that girls who acted too clever deserved to be taught humility. My bun fell. My exam card bent under my fingers. I fought back because I had learned the cost of not fighting, but there were three of them and one of me, and time was spilling away. A shopkeeper shouted from the corner. They fled. I ran. By the time I reached the school gate, the warning bell was already over. The principal was standing there like a monument to procedure, scolding late students in a neat line. I slipped past on an apology and sprinted across the courtyard, lungs tearing, heart pounding, hair half loose. At the classroom building entrance, a teacher checked the time and shook her head. 15 minutes have passed.
No.
Entry. I stared at her. I heard my own voice ask, please. She pointed to the printed regulation on the
Wall.
No entry.
no exceptions. I had not known a person could feel rage and emptiness in the same breath. The rest of the day passed in torn fragments. I sat in the back garden and completed an old science paper from memory because I could not bear not to be solving something. While everyone else wrote the exam, by the afternoon English test, my mind was a burned field. I made mistakes I recognized as I was making them and still could not stop. After school I went looking for Tao Shui. I found her at the internet cafe. She was upstairs, alone for once, headset on, yelling into a game, invincible under blue screen light. I walked over, tapped her shoulder, and smiled when she turned. Let us talk about life, I said. When I left the bathroom 10 minutes later, my uniform was dirtier, my lip was split, and the skin at my neck was scratched raw, but she was worse off and I did not care. I wandered to the public square behind the bus terminal, bought cigarettes from a kiosk out of pure spite, and lit one on a stone bench under a dead tree. I hated
Smoking.
my biological father had smoked himself into a grave before I was old enough to forgive him or hate him properly. In my first life, I had learned to smoke, briefly during the ugliest stretch of exam preparation in adulthood when fear had outgrown language and nicotine seemed simpler than screaming. I had quit almost immediately because I was bad at pretending self-destruction was sophistication. Now the smoke burned my throat and made my eyes sting. Good, I thought. Let it hurt. Footsteps approached through
The cold.
I did not need to look up to.
No, it was Song Baishan.
No one else in the world walked with that exact economy, as if every movement had been pre-approved by reason. He stopped in front of me. Everyone is looking for you. I exhaled, smoke toward the ground. Then they should.
Keep looking.
He looked at the cigarette, then at my face, then at the scrape on my knuckles. I laughed without humor. Congratulations. You have discovered the truth. I am still exactly the kind of person everyone said I was. He was silent for a moment. Then he held out a small plastic bag. Inside were antiseptic swabs and bandages. If you feel wronged, he said quietly, you can tell me. The sentence was so gentle it broke something. Not dramatically. Not beautifully. Just enough. I put out the cigarette and pulled my knees up onto the bench. He took off his school jacket and draped it over my head, shielding me from the square's thin yellow lights and from the humiliation of being seen crying. I cried hard and soundlessly under borrowed cotton that smelled faintly of sun-dried fabric and peppermint. When I could breathe again, I whispered into the dark made by his jacket. Next time I will catch up to you. He did not ask what I meant. He only said, okay.
The.
Next day, Mr. Chen yelled until his face flushed.
The.
Dean threatened disciplinary notices.
The.
Principal frowned about conduct. Tao Shui denied everything with such smooth contempt that I almost admired her Technique. I accepted the extra reflection. Essay. The warnings, the suspicion. I did not accept defeat. Results from the ruined mock came back, predictably ugly, because of the missed science paper. Students whispered. Some pitied me. Some smirked. Some found renewed evidence that I had always been a fraud. That evening I turned off my phone, spread the full year's calendar over my desk, and began. Again from zero.
No fantasies.
No emotional bargains.
No.
Asking life to be fair. If I wanted beta, I would have to climb toward it whether anyone else believed the mountain existed. Or not. Spring became a machine. Wake before dawn. Vocabulary before breakfast. Math problems before class. Review during lunch. Questions after evening study. Timed. Papers on weekend. Error logs every Sunday.
Weekly summaries. Monthly targets.
I stopped measuring progress by praise or rankings alone. Instead, I measured by shrinking weakness. Could I solve the hardest derivative problem in under 9 minutes? Could I keep chemistry equations straight when tired? Could I still structure a Chinese essay? After a bad morning, could I recover mid-paper from panic without destroying the...
Next 3 questions.
The answers slowly turned from no to sometimes to usually. Song Baishan became part of that machine, though neither of us said so directly. He no longer waited for me to ask before dropping a corrected proof beside my elbow or circling a common trap in a problem set. When he noticed I was still leaking points in function ranges, he brought me a stack of old competition adjacent practice questions and said, "You avoid ugly cases. Stop doing that." When I finally solved 3 in a row correctly, I turned around and grinned. Praise me. He looked at the papers, then at me. Acceptable. Heartless. But he was almost smiling. Once, when I fell asleep over a physics module in the library, I woke to find my pen capped, my neck covered with my own scarf, and a sticky note in Song Baishan's handwriting on the margin of the page. "Your final unit conversion is wrong." It felt more intimate than a poem. As the weather warmed, college banners began appearing outside schools in other districts. Recruitment slogans multiplied. Parents grew frantic. Teachers' voices acquired that end of year
Rudeness that comes from caring too much.
for too long.
100 days.
80, 60.
40.
At the assembly for the final 100 day sprint, Mr. Chen spoke like a man hammering hope into steel. Afterward, while everyone else took pictures with motivational boards, I stood beneath the plane trees staring at the countdown banner until the red numbers blurred. Song Baishan came to stand beside me. "You're thinking too much again. How can
You tell? You stop blinking?
I laughed softly.
Song Baishan.
"Yes, run as fast as you
Want?
One day I will definitely catch you." He looked at me with a steadiness that made the campus noise fall away. "I will wait in Beijing," he said. Those words stayed with me for weeks. At home, things continued in their crooked way.
My?
Mother's belly grew. My stepfather became alternately sentimental and tyrannical depending on money, alcohol, and luck at cards. Some nights she brought me cut fruit and hovered in the doorway as if apology might become speech if she stood there long enough. Other nights she said nothing at all. Once she handed me a folded wad of bills. "For university," she whispered. I took 3 notes and returned the rest. If I was leaving, I wanted to leave owing them as little as possible. On New Year's Eve, I sat at my dorm desk under a cheap lamp while fireworks exploded across the city and families shouted greetings from apartment windows. The girls in my dorm were home. The corridor was silent. I got stuck on a combinatorics question so infuriating I wanted to rip the page. At midnight, I sent 3 messages. "Happy New Year, Meng Shui." "Happy New Year, Mom." "Happy New Year, top student." Song Baishan replied first. "Happy New Year." "Still awake?" I asked. "Yes." "Free to explain a problem." The video call arrived in seconds. I answered in a whisper. His face appeared on the small glowing screen, hair damp from a shower, expression composed except for a trace of sleepiness around the eyes. He listened, asked me to angle the camera toward the page, and started explaining. Outside my window, fireworks painted the glass red and gold. On the screen, his voice moved calmly through cases, arrangements, exclusions, and the one hidden duplication I had missed. When he finished, he asked, "Got it?" "Yes." I should have hung up. Instead, I lay back on the bed and said, "Into the darkness, Song Baichin, do you ever think I'm pretending?" He was quiet. Then, no. The answer came so quickly that I almost did not trust it. Why? Because people pretending do not spend New Year's Eve asking about combinatorics. I laughed so hard tears sprang to my eyes. That winter was the first one in memory that did not feel entirely cold. When classes resumed, my winter exam ranking rose again, 3rd in the grade. The principal shook my hand on stage. Mr. Chen's gaze actually softened in public. The teachers began using phrases like sustained improvement and strong final potential. Classmates who used to borrow lip gloss from me now borrowed my summary sheets. And still, Song Baishan was first. Always.
First.
For the first time, the distance between us felt countable rather than mythic. Then came one final threat from the old world. He Yiming cornered me outside the dormitory one evening just after sunset. "Qiao Lin," he said, as if saying my name, with enough old ownership could rewind time. "I know you're angry, but you do not need to act so cold. I do not care." He grabbed my wrist. The pressure took me right back to 18, to all the small coercions girls are taught to minimize. Before I could wrench away, someone hit him hard enough from the side that he staggered into the wall.
Song Baishan. stood between us.
I had seen him win medals, solve impossible problems, and keep his temper through classroom chaos. I had never seen
Him angry.
Now I did. It was not loud.
Anger.
It was worse. He said you were bothering her, Song. Baishan said when the dorm supervisor came. Running. He Yiming cursed. I said, we broke up months ago. The rest proceeded through offices, warnings, and administrative paperwork. He Yiming got a disciplinary note. Mr. Chen made me write yet another reflection essay, though his sigh suggested he was almost embarrassed to assign it. Song Baishan got one too because rules were rules and fighting technically was fighting. After the office cleared, I took him to the infirmary to get the scrape on his cheek cleaned. You really did not have to.
Hit him, I said.
He sat on the edge of the treatment bed while the nurse dabbed disinfectant. Maybe I wanted to. The nurse raised her brows and left us alone to get cotton from. Another room. I stared. He met my gaze without
Flinching.
Then, to my astonishment, he smiled. It changed his whole face. Not enough to make him less himself, just enough to reveal the person inside. The discipline. I laughed helplessly. So the top student is capable of impulse, only under special circumstances, such as people touching what is not theirs. The air between us shifted. The nurse returned before I could decide whether to pretend I had misunderstood. Exam season swallowed the question. From then on, time accelerated. Mock after mock, forecast scores, application guidance, meetings, medical forms, motivational, lectures, teacher predictions scribbled in red ink. I kept climbing. Second in the grade once, back to third. Then second again. When the final campus ranking before the real exam was posted, I stood under the bulletin board with my breath caught somewhere between ribs and throat. 1. Song. Baishan. 2. Kiao Lin. Students clustered around, murmuring. Someone clapped me on the shoulder.
Meng Shui screamed loud enough to
startle birds out of the ginkgo trees. Mr. Chen pretended not to beam and failed. Song Baishan came to stand beside me, hands in his pockets. I looked from the list to him. Scared of what? Of me catching you? He glanced at the rankings, then catch me in the real one.
the
Challenge in his voice was so clean, so exhilarating that I felt 17 and 26 at once, young enough to burn, old enough to know why. The night before the national exam, I dreamed of the motel again. The printer, the peach soda, the acceptance email. When I woke before dawn in the dormitory, the dream left behind not sadness, but certainty. I had not been given a second life to erase the first. I had been given one to answer it. The exam days themselves were strangely peaceful. Chinese first, then math,
then
English, then comprehensive science.
the
Questions were hard, but not impossible. The invigilator's footsteps clicked.
pens.
Scratched in tidal waves across the hall. Every time panic tried to rise, I brought myself back to process. Read carefully. Mark traps. Trust preparation. Move on. Return later. Breathe. When the final bell rang after the last paper, students exploded into the sunlight, as if the building had been holding them
Hostage.
Some cried. Some laughed. Some called parents. Some immediately tried to estimate scores. With the manic confidence of survivors, I walked out slowly. At the gate, under a line of fluttering school banners, Song Baishan was waiting. He held 2 bottles of iced tea. I took one. Well, he asked. Well, I echoed. He looked at me for a long moment. Why beta in my first life, if anyone had asked, I might have answered with prestige, resources, the humanities, school, the library, the imagined future. All true, but incomplete. Now I smiled. Because it became an obsession, I said. And somewhere along the way, it turned into my name. He went very still. Then he nodded once, as if he understood. More than I had said. Results were released on a blazing summer afternoon. The website crashed twice. The school forum melted down. The class group chat became an emergency. Room of screenshots, voice messages, prayers, and lies. I checked mine alone in the school library because I could not bear an audience. My hands were steady when I entered the number. Then the screen refreshed. Chinese, math, English, science, total. For a full second, I did not comprehend it. Then I sat back so abruptly the chair screeched. First in the city, betas. Admission line comfortably passed.
My?
Vision blurred, not because it was perfect, because it was enough. Because enough, earned honestly, can feel like a miracle. Before I could even save the screenshot, my phone began vibrating like a trapped thing.
Meng Shui.
Mr.
Chen.
Unknown numbers. My mother.
A
Former classmate I had not spoken to in a
year.
the school office. I answered Mr. Chen first. He did not say hello. He shouted Chao Lin. I laughed and cried at the same time. He was crying too. I could hear it under the fury of his pride. Get to school, he barked. Immediately, the principal wants photos. The local education bureau is coming. And do not wear anything ridiculous. When I arrived, the campus gates were hung with red banners. Congratulations to Kiao Lin for achieving
first place in the city and being admitted
to Peking University. Students too young to know my story pointed at me as if I were already a rumor. Teachers who had once sighed over my attitude now shook my hand like I had done them a personal favor. Cameras flashed. The vice principal smiled until his cheeks trembled. My mother arrived an hour later in a blouse she wore for weddings and funerals, her hair hastily pinned back.
My?
Stepfather came too, walking like a man, stunned by sunlight. They both looked at the banners first, then at me, then at the crowd around me. And I watched the exact moment pride overrode every old narrative they had used to shrink me. My mother touched my arm carefully. Lin, she said, using a childhood nickname so gently that it almost hurt.
You did it?
I looked at her. This was the love I had once starved for. So why did it feel like a gift delivered to the wrong address? Because it was not for the girl who had cried over shredded test papers at 7. Not for the teenager slapped for dreaming. Not for the daughter accused of theft, laziness, ingratitude, excess. Not for the child who had learned to make herself small enough to survive their weather. It was for the version of me validated by success. I accepted the bouquet she offered because refusing would have created a scene, but I did not mistake the moment for healing. That evening, after the school ceremonies and the district interviews and the endless congratulations, I met Song Baishan at the old playground behind the library. He had also gotten in, of course. Tsinghua engineering, exactly as expected. We sat side by side on the rusting bleachers with bottled soda, sweating between us. The school was quiet for once. No more rankings, I said. No more rankings. He agreed. So who won? He looked up at the darkening sky. We both did. I should have been satisfied. Instead, I heard myself ask if I had not changed. If I would stay the same kind of person I was, would you still have talked to me? He answered without hesitation. I talked to you before you changed. I turned to him. He continued, still watching the sky. You think the first thing I noticed was your grades. It was not. What was it? The way you asked questions, he said, as if the answer might save you. I could not speak. After a moment, he finally looked at me directly, and then he added a little more. Quietly, it mattered to me that it did. There are confessions that arrive grandly, with flowers and witnesses and rehearsed courage. And there are confessions that walk beside you for months, disguised as notes in margins, extra problems, shared subway rides, and a white scarf in falling snow. I smiled before I could stop myself. You are very bad at sounding romantic. I'm not trying to sound romantic. That is the problem. For the first time in our entire history, he laughed without reservation. It was enough. University changed us as it should. Beijing was harder and brighter than any dream I had built from brochures. Beta was full of people who had once been the first in their cities, and Tsinghua was full of people determined to become the first in everything else. We were no longer rare. We were challenged, humbled, expanded. I studied until the library closed, then worked part-time on weekends to cover what scholarships did not. I refused money from home except for the bare minimum required to preserve a peace. I did not care to dramatize. Song Baishan disappeared into labs and programming teams and competitions that seemed to create their own weather systems. We met between campuses, between deadlines, between growth spurts of selfhood. Nothing about those years was simple. That was why they were real. My mother called more often after my younger brother was born. Sometimes she asked practical things. Sometimes she cried and said motherhood had only taught her too late what she had failed to give me. Sometimes she hinted about family obligations, the way people test cold water with a toe. I answered kindly when I could, briefly when I must, and never again from hunger. My stepfather asked for money exactly once. I said no. He called me ungrateful. I said, then let gratitude raise your son. He never called again. As for he yimming, I heard he opened a car, washed chain with borrowed money, drove it into debt, and then told everyone the market had cheated him. Tao Shui married early, divorced earlier, and one summer sent me a friend request with no message attached. I left it pending until the platform deleted it automatically. Meng Shui really did go abroad and reinvent herself 3 times before settling into one shape she liked. We still talk, mostly at odd hours, mostly about ridiculous things, which is a way of saying we remained important. Mr. Chen retired with a bad back, a stubborn voice, and an alarming tenderness for the students he had once terrorized. When I sent him a photograph of my graduate admission years later, he replied, only about time. And Song Baishan, he was there when I got that admission email in my first life, or rather, in the life that came after the first. Not
Physically.
not in the motel office, but he was there in the habits he had, helped sharpen in the standards he had, forced me to stop lowering in the unromantic faith of a boy who once said
No, when I asked if he thought I was.
pretending. By then we had been together for years. Not because one brilliant exam changed everything, because countless ordinary days had. The last time I returned to my high school, I was invited to give a talk. Before the 100-day countdown, the new students sat in rows under the same banners, half bored, half frightened, all pretending the future was either too large to comprehend or too irrelevant to fear. I stood at the podium and looked at the room where my 2 lives had once split. I told them no myth about instant transformation. I did not say hard work will definitely reward you. It does not. Not always. Not fairly. Not on schedule. I said something else. Some of you think a low score means you are that score. It does not. Some of you think being underestimated will protect you from disappointment. It won't. Some of you think you need someone else to tell you you are worth the effort. You do not. The room was very quiet, I thought. Of the motel reception desk, the library,
Window.
the white scarf, the smoke in the square, the red banner, the email that changed one
life and then somehow led me back to
another. Then I smiled. Keep going, I told them. Not because the world is always kind to people who try, but because there are names you should get to call yourself. Before this life ends, don't hand them away. After the talk, a girl with badly cut bangs and furious eyes Waited until everyone else had gone. Teacher Kiao, she said, clutching a math paper to her chest. Can I ask one? Question. I nearly laughed at the familiarity of it. Of course. She unfolded the paper with both hands, laid it on the desk, and pointed to the last problem. Can you show me where I'm wrong? I took the pen she offered, and in the bright after-class silence, I began.